Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 13th of March 2025. Quite a lot of interesting stuff in today's military aid video, if you don't mind me saying so myself. We're going to start with something I've been talking about a lot recently. I'm going to go through a Politico article detailing this. Now, on the back of the EU and Ursula von der Leyen declaring there are going to be these $150 billion euro loans, and potentially a situation where up to 800 billion euros is unlocked for European nations to spend on defence, we have the declaration that this should be spent within the EU. Exactly what I was saying is likely to happen and fits in line with the defence industrial policy and defence policy, where they want to procure 60% of all new items from within the EU. And given that the US has now started a trade war with the EU and there's this divergence of the US away from Europe in terms of politics, alliances, etc., this is going to be good for Europe in terms of stimulating the European economies, which really, really need it. But it's also going to worry the Americans and the defense industry in the US. They are going to then start lobbying Trump and saying, what are you doing? This is not looking good for us. So lots to consider here. So the governments should use EU loans to buy from European producers, says Ursula von der Leyen. This is concerning the 150 billion euro loans the Commission wants to borrow on markets to boost the bloc's defense capacity to buy from European firms. Now, I'm just going to join this article further down. It's very important these are used to buy European products, says the French finance minister. Quote, there's a question of security and not being dependent on other continents, says Swedish finance minister Elisabeth Svantesson on Tuesday, though Sweden will continue to buy arms from other parts of the world. Proposing to use EU loans to buy European products is also a way to win over those worried about military priorities displacing economic and social priorities. Quote, this will also have positive spillovers for our economy and our competitiveness. It will include new factories and production lines here in Europe, von der Leyen says. This is really important. Why the US is such a force to be reckoned with in the defense domain is that it's kind of a snowball effect. The better your stuff is, the more people are going to buy it. And the more people buy it, the cheaper it becomes because of economies of scale. And Europe, especially when it doesn't work together, when you have these individual companies just making things at smaller scales, and you look at the Leopard tank as a kind of example of that, the more expensive those tanks become and the fewer sales you're going to make abroad. Europe really needs to get together, bolster its own defense industry to then make it more competitive by economies of scale. And if you're advising people to, or if you're even not just persuading, but if you're making regulations such that they have to buy a greater proportion of stuff from within the EU, then that is going to make the European manufacturers more competitive. Now, you can argue that that's an unfair lift up for the European defence manufacturers, that this is where governments are coming in and making these entities more competitive, is not allowing the free market to do its own thing. But you'll find that generally happens all throughout the world, even when you look at places like Singapore, that's often held up as this free market paragon of free market virtue. But actually, there's an awful lot of centralized strategic planning involved. If you go and read Ha-Joon Chang's 23 things you don't know about capitalism or whatever, really good account of how these times and places like the Industrial Revolution in the UK or Singapore or here or there, where we think, this is an amazing example of pure free market capitalism. Actually, there's almost always an awful lot of government intervention and government motivation into a lot of what happens in these times and places. Greek Finance Minister Kotsis Hatzidakis agreed, noting in a statement that funds should primarily be directed towards investments in the EU's strategic autonomy in the defence sector. It's about trying to get away from dependence upon the US and other places. But not everyone is on the same page. The Dutch, and JR was sending me something because he's Dutch, sending me something about there being a vote in the Dutch parliament that didn't support this kind of 800 billion euro thing. I need to go and look into that in more detail, but I wonder if this is partly what's going on here. The Dutch, who are currently angling for contracts to manufacture American Patriot missiles in the Netherlands, would rather if funds were also dispersed to foreign weapons made in the EU. And that's a fair, I guess, position to take there. So it's kind of like you're attracting inward investment. So, quote, the lion's share of any investment fund should go to production in Europe. I'm not against using money for production outside, but what is important is that we allow for production licenses. We should keep the UK and Norway on board, Dutch Defence Minister Ruben Brekelmans told reporters on Tuesday on the sidelines of the Paris Defence and Strategy Forum. And of course, that means that companies like, I mean, it gets difficult when many concerns are multinational, and you're like, well, is that an EU? It's part EU, part owned by this country, part owned by that country, or investors in that country, or whatever. And you look at BAE systems that go into manufacturing projects with or start industrial concerns with other entities that are from other countries, and you get these conglomerates, and you need to kind of allow for that, and then building stuff within Europe as I say, inward investment from these companies from, say, the UK and Norway is something you might want to do in order to promote closer cooperation between European states to try and bring Norway and the UK into the EU. So there's all sorts of different chess pieces going on here, I guess. Meanwhile, the group of 20 EU countries, including Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, are proposing a security and defence partnership with the UK, according to a joint non-paper seen by Politico. Quote, a mutually beneficial partnership with the UK would be ambitious and should comprise concrete defence cooperation, the document reads. It adds the defence industry cooperation is, quote, an important element of such an arrangement. One approach to getting the UK, and I think Rory Stewart of Rest is Politics has said this in the past, one way to get the UK closer to Europe is in defence, and that could be the opening. So for those who want the UK to rejoin the EU, or at least to work a lot more closely with the EU in order to benefit economically, the defence sector is going to be the way to do that. And this is kind of what's being stated here. Interesting, last night, our government twice admitted in different places, I think. So there's a trade war with the US, with the EU, but also with the UK in terms of steel and I presume aluminium as well. And our government said we don't have the clout that the EU has in order to retaliate. So the UK can't put retaliatory tariffs back on the US because we'll just get done. We are now a minnow. This is exactly what I said back in 2016 when I was debating this in public. I had 2 debates in Bournemouth, and everything I said is coming true. I was like, we cannot win. It's impossible to win the economic argument from a Leave point of view. It can't be won. It wasn't won, and it isn't being won now. We are a minnow outside of the EU, and we are therefore vulnerable to the vagaries of the bigger players. And if the US goes, we're going to slap tariffs on you, and we go, we can't even put tariffs back, that shows you that we are diminished in power outside the EU. It's just simple. It's like, I don't want to reopen Brexit, but I do, because actually we are not a strong player anymore. We are susceptible. And we need to start, I think, getting closer. When you look at how compromised the US is at the moment, we need to be getting closer to Europe. But then that means that we're going to annoy the US, and the US can have power over us to kick us in the shins. Anyway, a mutually beneficial partnership with the UK would be would be good, is where we left it. So now Polish Finance Minister Domanski told reporters he also hopes to closely cooperate with the UK. But France, however, does not appear among the signatories of the joint call. Interesting. In practice, von der Leyen's language keeps the door open for money to flow to companies in the UK and Norway. So it's not just EU, there's this EU plus. But anyway, interesting. We are going to see the EU, I think, rearm, and that will be to the benefit of EU and European economies. Finland has announced a $217 million military aid package for Ukraine. Finnish Defence Minister Antti Hakanen confirmed that the package includes artillery ammunition, citing Ukraine's urgent need for such supplies, and they are producing. Norwegian Finnish concern NAMO is ramping up production. I have a feeling was Hakanen, one of their dignitaries, is in Kiev at the moment today. Finland and Ukraine have signed a defence cooperation memorandum today, aiming to deepen ties in defence material research, innovation, and ammunition production. They also announced that over 200 million euro aid package. That's a 28th package of support. Finland are very secretive on what they give to Ukraine, so we don't often know until sometimes we see bits of kit that have come from Finland on the battlefield. We go, oh, they've given that, have they? Right. France National Assembly voted yesterday 288 to 54. So it's a pretty good, resounding majority there for a resolution to strengthen support to Ukraine and seize all. This is super important. Seize all frozen Russian assets. I presume this will entail the seizing of French frozen Russian assets, which I think are sort of 22 billion. I think after Belgium, where they have all that money in Euroclear, 210 billion. I think 22 billion in France and 20 billion in the UK. And I think France's last aid package of 195 million of last week, that was all early this week. I can't remember. That was underwritten by frozen Russian assets from that 22 billion. But now they're talking about, because the government have been against giving the frozen Russian assets as a whole to Ukraine, now there seems to be a general consensus in the Parliament and National Assembly that actually they should do that. All the mainstream parties supported. La France Insoumise, LFI, and some communist MPs voted against. That's unsurprising. National Rally abstained. Interesting. That's Marine Le Pen's French right-wing party. So the far left party, La France Insoumise, seems to be against helping Ukraine at the moment. Rassemblement National seem to have dampened their admiration for Russia and Russian money. So that's good news. Now, French aid to Ukraine put some meat on the bone here. This afternoon, National Assembly at the National Assembly, the seizure of frozen Russian assets will be debated in a resolution for strengthening support for Ukraine. Obviously, that was successfully voted on. The motion calls on the European Union, NATO, and other allied countries to continue and increase their political, economic, and military support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. And an amendment co-signed by 3 members of the Macronist group, Together for the Republic, EPR, including its president Gabriel Attal, even proposes going further and using these funds to strengthen Europe's defence capabilities. Although it is also supported by the Socialists and the Greens, it will be difficult to find a majority at the National Assembly on this issue. Well, they did. It will depend in particular on the position of the members of the EPR. However, the seizure of frozen Russian assets is not a good option for La France Insoumise and National Rally. But as we heard, National Rally abstained and France Insoumise didn't vote for it. The latter tabled an amendment to limit the use of money to interest only, and so on and so forth. But good news from the French there. Now, the Ministry of the Economy and Finance in France is studying ways to finance national defence with a particular focus on life insurance. To mobilise these savings, a national defence fund could be set up, initially financed by banks, insurers and institutional investors such as BPI France. In fact, life insurance has just passed the €2 trillion mark. For their part, banks and insurers are quite willing to contribute. Last but not least, it would not cost the state anything. So obviously some creative ways of trying to find funding for defense there. Now, France will finance the delivery of additional Themis robots equipped with the Roka system to the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, SESU. CNIM Système Industriel, CSI, will be responsible for training Ukrainian operators and maintainers, as well as CEFA, which will deliver 4 additional mine clearing systems in 2026. We've seen a couple of Themis end up on Andrew Perpetua's loss list. I presume they can be given different roles. These ones look to be more for emergency services and demining and whatnot. But yeah, so more Themis might end up on going on the way to Ukraine. Exale, says French aid to Ukraine, will partner with Geomines, I don't know, to supply land and underwater demining equipment to train Ukrainian instructors for more than 6 months. Geomines deminers will train the SESU and the National Police of Ukraine in demining techniques and the use of robots supplied by Exale. Shark Robotics will deliver 40 firefighting robots and associated training to the Ukrainian civil security. This will be completed in just 12 months. So the French really stepping up here. It looks with a whole bunch of pretty good looking UGVs and USVs there. I know USV is often seen as unmanned surface vehicles. I want an unmanned underwater vehicle. Anyway, current difficulties in the automotive industry, says French aid to Ukraine again, could make it easier for manufacturers in the French defense, industrial and technological base, such as MBDA France, to equip themselves with machines or robots in order to increase their production of Aster missiles more quickly. And that's being reported in Le Monde. Well, actually, this is happening in Germany. So lots of news in the last 24 hours or so about Volkswagen considering manufacturing equipment for the German army as Europe accelerates its rearmament. It's like getting back to the Second World War. With Germany's car exports down 50% from pre-pandemic levels, automakers have spare capacity. And this also means that companies like Rheinmetall can think about acquiring idle car manufacturing plants. So German Rheinmetall, Europe's largest ammunition maker, has surpassed Volkswagen in its market value. Rheinmetall's valuation is now 56.2 billion euros, topping Volkswagen 54.7 billion euros. That's a direction of travel there. So then it comes as little surprise that as Germany continues to ramp up defense production, the arms giant Rheinmetall is preparing to purchase Volkswagen's automotive factory in Osnabrück and turn it into an armoured vehicle manufacturing plant. Quote, then, this is coming from Reuters, then you can also consider whether a plant like Osnabrück, which I think would be very suitable, whether you could get involved, says the CEO of Rheinmetall, Armin Paprika. Volkswagen's Osnabrück has a number of features needed for armoured vehicle production, including good rail infrastructure, heavy-duty cranes, and corresponding load-bearing capacities. So not only can companies like Volkswagen start making military equipment to beef up their portfolio, I guess, and keep liquid, but also defense manufacturers like Rheinmetall can come along and say, hey, that's a nice factory you got there doing the square root of NAFO at the moment. We'll take that over. Thank you very much. Rheinmetall is prepared to supply arms as well for possible Ukrainian peacekeeping missions, of course. Rheinmetall, again, CEO Armin Paprika said the company could provide more than 2,000 items for such a mission, including tanks, armored vehicles, electronic warfare systems, reconnaissance drones, and satellite technology. And this is where the dollar signs are going with such concerns. And of course, you know, not that that's necessarily a criticism. You need to give impetus and motivation to arms and manufacturers to really help out Ukraine and all of the entities involved in supporting Ukraine. Ukraine has exhausted, however, its Atakams missile stockpile. The US supplied fewer than 40 of those missiles, running out with the Ukrainian army running out in January, or the Ukrainian armed forces. US officials prioritized other weapons over Atakams, thought that the Atakams inventory was lacking. What else from the US? Quite a bit to talk through. We'll continue here with USAID terminating $75 million of grant agreements with the Ukraine Energy Support Fund. This is a huge dent to Ukraine's ability to keep its energy infrastructure up and running. The US Agency for International Development, USAID, has notified the Energy Community Secretariat about the termination of $75 million grant agreement with the Ukraine Energy Support Fund. This decision will reduce funds for vital equipment needed for Ukraine's energy sector. That is, again, the US in just another way kicking Ukraine in the shins. As Oliver Alexander says, given that there have been these threats to, the agreement to tool Ukraine with US military aid and give intelligence to Ukraine, there's kind of flip-flopping. But also, there's going to be an interesting decision for the Americans to make today, because it looks like the latest I'm hearing is the Russians have turned down a ceasefire deal. And if they turn down a ceasefire deal, is that them not coming to the table? Is it time for the US to punish Russia? So Oliver Alexander says the 10,000 MAGA accounts in my replies arguing that all aid to Ukraine being stopped was the best thing to ever happen now have to do a quick 180 to ensure that they will still treat Trump as like an omniscient god. And I've often, in fact, I've written articles comparing support of Trump to deification, to the idea that he's some kind of god and can do no wrong. And if he can do no wrong, it means that any decision he makes, and if he flip-flops on stuff and changes his mind and he would never admit he's wrong, but then do something completely opposite to what he said he was going to do, then you have to follow along with that, and you have to add rationalization. It's called post hoc rationalization. So those supporters then have to go along, this is the best idea ever, and then he completely changes and says, but changing was the best idea ever, and then he changes back, which is also the best idea ever. And it's like you tie yourself in a knot, because of course there is a distinct lack, I think, often of deep-seated rationality in many of Trump's decisions. But here you see the followers, like a flock of sheep, just going, yeah, and whatever this guy does and says is amazing. It's amazing. And then you find that you're rationally all over the place. Now, interesting, no American company can keep up with Ukraine, according to a quote from the Wall Street Journal. America turns to Ukraine to build better drones is the title of the article there. American drone technology has proven disappointing on the battlefield, as I'm sure many countries' drones will have been prior to the war, because they're not battlefield tested in the way that Ukrainian drones most certainly bloody well are. So startups have turned to Ukrainian manufacturers to create more sophisticated combat-tested drones for the US military. The US Department of Defense estimates that it has the capacity to produce up to 100,000 drones a year, and last year Ukraine built more than 2 million drones. Quote, their designs work great, and they have the best lab for testing all their models in combat conditions, says CX2 co-founder Nathan Mintz. This is a fascinating situation where the US is now going to Ukraine. The US Army has awarded a contract to the Ukrainian-based company Skiftech for the development and maintenance of laser-based tactical engagement simulation equipment. So now Ukraine has the ability to take their tech and their knowledge to the outside world and sell their wares and become, I talked about this previously, you've got to look for the silver lining to the cloud that is this war if you are Ukraine. What can we be the best in the world at now? Now that this war has ravaged us, well, actually, we can try and become world leaders. As to go back to that Wall Street Journal article, no US company can compete with Ukraine. The US is asking Ukraine to help develop better drones. It is going to be a good time for drone manufacturers in Ukraine, that's for sure. Okay. I've talked about Warren Buffett and Howard Buffett before. I've talked about George Soros before, and I say, these people get attacked, lambasted by the right, particularly in America, for being libs and whatever. But actually, when you look at who has helped Ukraine the most, it's these guys. Although this isn't about George Soros, this is about Warren Buffett and his son Howard Buffett, who have donated massive amounts to Ukraine. In 2024, Warren Buffett's son Howard Buffett donated $800 million to aid to Ukraine, along with other initiatives. In 2025, he contributed an additional $500 million. After donating at least $1.45 billion, Howard Buffett is the largest ever private donor to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is knobbing around, slagging off Ukraine at every conceivable opportunity. And what what hospitals are named after Elon Musk? What's he doing? You've got Buffett and you've got Bill Gates and malaria. These guys have got to the, they've earned enough money to say, right, I need to actually add something back to this world to make this world a better place. How can I do that? Whereas Elon Musk is like, how can I make the world a better place now? I'm the richest man on earth. I'm going to destroy the American government from the inside and then make sure that that Donald Trump, my co-president, buys a swastika off me, a Tesla off me, on the lawn to the White House. It's just like grift. And these other people are like, no, I'm going to put back. I've reached the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In some moment of self-actualization, I realize that what makes me the better person, what fulfills me as a human being, is to give back to the world. I've extracted from the world as a billionaire. Now I'm giving back. And I'm giving back quite a lot as far as the Buffett family is concerned. I would just love to see that from others. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. We're seeing it from, what's his name? Forrest. Is Andrew Forrest over in Australia. A bit of a controversial figure himself, but he's at least helping out Ukraine. Iceland allocates, isn't it incredible? You got like a single human being, $1.45 billion. In Iceland, we're helping out 2 million, and it seems like, oh, okay, that's really cool, thank you, but compared to 1.45 billion, Iceland allocates over $2 million to support Ukrainian energy sector. Of course, this is like effectively taxpayers' money, so it's somewhat different than an individual person who has that much wealth. Iceland will allocate over 2 million euros to Ukraine's energy support fund, and that will hopefully go some way to the 75 million that's missing now that USAID has fallen away. Training of Ukrainian defenders continues. NATO member countries are teaching Ukrainian soldiers to operate new military equipment, including Leopard 2 tanks. So that's good news. And I think that's about where we are left. There was a few, what other things to add? So peacekeepers in Ukraine, potential strikes on Russia. Forces may receive heavy equipment and weapon stocks. So Britain and France discuss strikes on Russia, and if ceasefire, what happens if a ceasefire is violated, and it's obviously going to be about what equipment these people are going to receive. As I kind of discussed earlier, Rheinmetall could step up and help out there. And we have these are 3 extra tabs I was meant to throw in, but I forgot to put them in the correct place. Germany is also given some mini excavators, special trucks, and minibuses to Zaporizhia Oblast. That's the German Federal Civil Protection Organization to strengthen public utilities there. Excellent stuff. Thank you to the Germans. And just a bit more detail on the French resolution supporting Ukraine there that I've already talked to you about. So that's pretty much that from me. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Lots going on as ever. I'm going to try and get a frontline update done today, but I do have I'm really looking forward to this, a live chat with Zarina Zabritsky, who has written extensively and researched extensively on Donald Trump's relationship with Russia, should we say, and whether he is indeed compromised. So please check that out. That's in an hour's time I'm going to be talking. So by the time you get this, it's going to be the next thing on your list to watch. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.